Shut up and sit down.
The current state of politics is unsustainable, politically, economically.
You still have distrust there.
We all come from very different places.
Man, we don't want the government to do a damn thing.
We deserve better.
People have to have the information in front of them.
It is about supporting, platforming, and assisting the people who are out here actually doing the fight.
There you go. Like, just promote people who are doing something. Volunteer to work with people who you like. And
take an issue that's important to you and do something.
You are part of that declaration against tyranny.
This conversation gives me a little more hope for the future.
The one, the only Fight for Liberty. This is the cherry on top.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fight for Liberty Live. I'm your host, David Fite, and tonight we have an awesome episode for you with a really cool presidential candidate. But first, as always, we're going to talk a little bit about our sponsors. Tonight we're going to talk about Blood of Tyrants wine. If you are looking for a nice night in while also sipping on the blood of your enemies and enjoying a nice glass of wine, go on over to bloodoftyrants.wine and use promo code F4L today, and you can get yourself a nice couple bottles of wine while also supporting the Liberty Movement, the show, the network, and a whole bunch of people that you know and love. So go on over, grab about 13 to 17 bottles today, and help everybody out. But without further ado, we have an awesome guest for you tonight. He ran for Congress last cycle. He's running for president this cycle. He's a former law enforcement officer, has a very impressive academic and corporate career. So we're just going to bring him up and talk about him. Mike ter Maat, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. It's a real joy to be with you on the Fight Club. Long-time listener, long-time watcher, first-time talker.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Then if you should know that I always like to start out the show with kind of an introductory question, a little testimonial. So I'm curious, when did you first have the concept of libertarianism explained to you?
Explained to me?
Mm-hmm.
That is an interesting question. I had libertarianism explained to me in the context of someone accusing me of being a libertarian. In other words, I thought I was a Republican, right? Mm. As a member of the Republican Party, we're probably going back 30 years now. And a buddy of mine, Russ Page, if he's listening or watching, Russ tells me, "You're not really a Republican, you're a libertarian." And I'm like, take that back. That's a horrible thing to say to a friend. And we talked about it. And I did not immediately join the Libertarian Party even at that moment. But he was futzing around with it. Now, I've been in the Libertarian Party for, 15 years. And he's a Republican. So I don't know what went wrong with our lives, but
how the turntables.
I'm sure happy to be in the Libertarian Party and have been for some time now.
So what was the final catalyst that actually brought you into the party itself?
That's an interesting question. I came to libertarianism from the side of economic efficiency. I sort of grew up as an economist, and I think people typically. Although I suppose not uniformly, but I think typically people come to the Libertarian Party, libertarianism, either from the side of efficiency. It's it's what makes the world work better, right, as an empirical matter, or from the ethical side, whether it makes the world work better or not. It's just the right thing to do. People don't have the moral authority to make decisions for other people. And I came to it certainly from the standpoint of being a relatively conservative economist. I had, my dad had made me read Milton Friedman when I was coming out of high school, which is probably weird also, right? He made me read a lot of other things that I don't remember, but I did remember that Milton Friedman stuck. And so that's sort of how I came into it. Grew up in the banking industry, and when I went to graduate school, it was what we called a rational expectation school, which is sort of a descendant of the Chicago school, which is a descendant of the Austrian school. So I was grounded in the idea of free markets making the world a better place and allocating resources in a way that made people's lives better.
Mm-hmm.
And I was of an opinion at the time. This'll cause you and maybe some of your audience to chuckle. I was of an opinion at the time, talking about the 80s and early 90s, that's what the Republicans were standing up for.
Mm-hmm.
These are back in the days when George Herbert Walker Bush said, "Read my lips, no new taxes."
Right.
And then changed his mind less than 2 years later, to the disappointment of all of us young, dumb Republican economists.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until later that I joined the Libertarian Party, really felt motivated to do so because I was coming to terms with the fact that, number one, economic efficiency isn't everything there is to understand about the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that it really is true that even if it were not the driving force in my understanding of libertarianism up to that point, it should still be our common understanding that governments, indeed other individuals, don't have the authority to make decisions for us, that as human beings, we all are born with the innate right to live our lives by our own standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very different way of looking at it. And I didn't really start looking at it that way until probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago. I joined the Libertarian Party around the time I became a police officer in my second career.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you brought up those like two avenues that people come into the movement, because it's the two avenues that the major parties claim for the most part. You know, the Republicans are claiming the fiscal conservancy and the efficiency and all of that, and the small government, and the left and the Democrats are claiming, you know, if you vote for us, that's the moral thing to do. And
right.
I definitely,
and they're both full of it, aren't they?
Yeah. When I came into the Libertarian Party, I was still deluded into thinking that the Republicans were decent at small government, and you know, the first presidential election I could vote in was 2016. So I had just watched 8 years of Obama just being awful. And I just
Are you really that young, David, or is it because you just moved to the United States, or you were a convicted felon, or you couldn't find the polling booth? Why was 2016 the first time you could vote?
I'm 26, so I was 19.
You just learned to read in 2016?
I was 19 at the time, yeah. And so I had watched the Democrats be kind of awful, and I had just kind of blamed a lot of the Republican shortcomings on, you know, a Democratic president and whatever. And so I still thought that they had the small government balanced budget chops, but
at least they were in opposition to that government.
Right. And but really what turned me over was there was only one person running for president that offered me both guns and weed, and that was Gary Johnson. I knew very little about libertarianism. Most of the platform I would have disagreed with if I had actually like gone down through it at the time. But you know, I had balanced budget.
Who's got time for that?
Right, balanced budget, gun rights, cannabis legalized. You pretty much have me there with just those three as 19-year-old David. I had never even smoked yet. I just knew that like this shouldn't be illegal. It's crazy.
Of course it's crazy. And, you know, I'm glad to hear you say it like that, because before your time, I'm going back to the 1980s and 90s, I think the Libertarian Party made the mistake of allowing itself to be branded as a pro-weed party as opposed to an anti-prohibition party.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you shouldn't have to be, you know, of a belief that everyone should be smoking marijuana to stand up for everyone's right to do so.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a much stronger position philosophically and ethically, morally, and I believe ultimately politically, when we stand up for people's rights, irrespective of how we might feel about individually, how we might feel about the way that individuals use those rights, right?
Yeah, it's a lot stronger of a message when you hear, like my good friend Reed Coverdale, who's never touched cannabis ever, is saying things just as strongly as I am.
As far as you know.
Yeah. True. Because when I say stuff like that, it kind of just comes across like, let me do the thing I want. Like,
Yeah, it
I
comes
want to
across as
do that.
self-serving.
Yeah.
Right.
But if it's, I won't do it. I don't really like it. Tried it once, not my thing. But people shouldn't be going to jail over it. That's so much stronger of a message.
Right. The government shouldn't be weighing in on it. Most libertarians don't carry, but that doesn't mean that we won't stand up for your Second Amendment rights.
Right.
We are not people who would march down the middle of the boulevard with Nazi flags, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't stand up for your First Amendment right to do whatever stupid thing that you want to do.
Right. Yeah.
In the same sense, it's important that we don't accidentally position ourselves as anti-vax. We're not per se anti-vax. Some of us are, some of us are not.
Mm-hmm.
But we are absolutely anti-vax mandate.
Right.
There's a big difference there. You can get as many vaccines as you want. Collect them all. I don't care.
Yeah.
Right. But when the government shoves it down your throat, it tastes differently, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction too, because there's a lot of people that I was talking to prior to COVID that are just wholly and totally never going to be interested in the party now, because they were people that went, full hook, line, and sinker into the COVID kind of hysteria. And, if you're not wearing a mask, you're killing grandma. Like
They're still wearing a mask, right?
Some of them, yeah. And so, like, some of the people that just bought it all the way, looking at some tweets and stuff from, like LP New Hampshire or, some of the other more kind of firebrand messaging groups within our movement, like they're just, nope, never, you guys are crazy, you're anti-science and all this other stuff. Where if we were positioning ourselves in, I think, a slightly more neutral stance, because like old regime was too quiet, new regime's too loud on the topic.
Well, neutral with regard to the vaccine itself.
Yeah.
I love being whole hog in with both feet against the vaccine mandates, against the idea that you might lose your job because the government says that you have to be vaccinated. That is really problematic.
Yeah.
Worse than problematic. I mean, that is some evil stuff right there.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be against that like iron. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we undermine that a little bit when we accidentally let people believe that the reason we're against the vaccine mandates is because we hate vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, even if a vaccine, let's take a counterexample, right? Even if a vaccine has been around for 50 years and we're all comfortable with the idea that there are no side effects, it works perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
It'll save you, it'll save your grandmother, it'll save your kids. It doesn't matter what age you are. And by the way, if you don't get it, you're going to die. Even if there was such a perfect vaccine, that doesn't mean the government has the right to tell you got to take it.
Right. If I want to die of a horrible
the more we
disease,
talk about it, the funnier it seems, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, if I want to die of some horrible disease, that is my right at the end of the day. Like,
well, friends of yours, now that I know you live upstate New York, myself included, may kick in your door and shove the vaccine into your arm, right? But we won't let the government do it for you, David.
Right. That's what friends are for. If you have friends that will keep you accountable, we don't need the government. If we actually had community and, interpersonal connection, we wouldn't need them. Which is why I think like a lot of libertarians that get that part of it went so hog wild against the lockdowns, because they saw that as a destructor of community and pushing us more and more into needing government. Something that really struck me as crazy. The other day I was out, I was doing laundry at the laundromat, and there was a huge fire at a bar, probably like 4 blocks from where I was, 4 or 5 blocks away. It was like over the river,
It's very unlikely that you were responsible for that, David. I don't care how long you run the dryer. Those typically don't cause fires. I know you feel bad about it, but you got to let that go, brother.
Oh, man. But I was just thinking about it. Like 150 years ago, I would have taken off running towards that fire to see if there was somebody that needed help or something to
You would
do.
have had to.
And the even crazier, I'm standing the backside of the building that I am in has a giant mural of one of the fires that happened in my town back in like the late 1800s. And, you know, in this mural is like the whole town coming together and helping. And here I am just watching fire trucks drive by because, oh, well, the government's got it handled and they'll handle it. And I don't need to do anything.
It really undermines your sense of community sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Particularly when your first responders are hired from, you know, when it's an agency that is sort of large compared to your community and feels like it's brought in from the outside. I'm a big believer in these agencies being as small as possible so that the local communities have as much control as possible.
Yeah.
You know, communities need to be involved in deciding how they want their first responders to work. You know, the typical problems we talk about are with police, but there are questions with other first responders too. But those have to be controlled at as local a level as possible.
Yeah. So I want to go back in time quite a ways and start out with
you mean like 2017?
Back towards the corporate and academic career, and just ask, how did the world of econ and finance call your name originally?
I was better at math than writing. How's that?
That is relatable as hell. Okay.
I bet it is.
That's probably the main reason I ended up in finance myself.
Yeah, well, there you go. You know, an affinity for the analytics side, right?
Yeah.
I went to school as an engineer. I was an undergraduate engineering student. One of the engineering program I was in was quite competitive. I enjoyed it very much. But let's just say, how do I put this politely? My advisor was not disappointed when I said I didn't want to go to grad school for engineering. Instead, I thought I should go to business school. I think he believed that single decision had improved international safety on aircraft forevermore. The fact that I would not be, you know, helping to design airplanes that he was sending his best graduates toward. So I went to business school, went to work for a couple of banks, and then had a real interest in public policy. And so I moved to Washington, D.C. And as you know, David, all of your viewers know, if you want to make the world a better place, the thing to do is to move to Washington and go to work for the federal government. That's true, isn't it?
Oh, so much true.
So much true. Well, if you were 26 at the time, and this was 1987, in a time when I think Americans in general trusted our government more than we do today, not so much because we've changed, but because we've learned so much about how our government really isn't to be trusted. So much of what we understand about government today has been revealed since Watergate. Remember that before the 70s, wow, we really had not been given enough information about whether to trust the government or not. It was just, a cloak behind which information was not revealed to us. The government did quite an efficient job at not letting us know some of the stupid crap it was involved with.
Oh, yeah.
So in 1987, you know, if you wanted to make the world a better place and you were, conservative, you wanted to study economics, it made all the sense in the world to go to George Washington University and get involved with government agencies.
But
it was a weird experience.
Yeah. What are some things that you learned from that experience that you think are going to help out with the campaign?
You learn that governments have a lot in common. Republicans and Democrats, governments inside the United States, governments outside the United States, local governments and big national governments. You learn that they actually have more in common. You know, that's a really interesting question that you asked. They actually have more in common than they do dissimilarities. As much as we all make a big deal about differences between parties and nations and governments, they all have a lot in common. They all attract a certain breed of individual who likes the idea of making decisions for other people, right? Which is, of course, the nature of the beast.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's an element of public service to it. I don't want to throw everybody under the bus completely. There are people who go into government service because they really want to do the right thing. They really want to help people out. They really believe that if the correct decisions are made, their fellow citizens' lives will be better. All of which is probably true. The problem is that you attract the type of people who like to make decisions for other people. And therefore, even if you were to attract people who are naturally fiscally conservative, say, you naturally are contributing to the development of institutions that will naturally move toward taking more power to itself, getting involved with politicians whose livelihoods depend on their skill at taking power to themselves, who are able to advance their careers by making the case that they're good at it, not that they do less of it, right?
Yep.
Politicians don't score points by saying, oh, look at all the power I turned back to you. Although that would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
That would
if
be
people
great.
appreciated that and somebody tried it. That's why we need elected libertarians in office, I believe. But typically politicians make hay by saying, look at all the good decisions I made for you.
Right.
And all too often, too many Americans are willing to say, I trust you. And I think that that is decreasing. It's still a big problem. But I think that one of the reasons we have such a huge opportunity in 2024 is because Americans are increasingly waking up to the idea that our political duopoly is moving toward authoritarianism. Each one has given up on those legacy agenda that you and I were talking about. It's very hard to find a Democrat who's anti-war, right?
Right.
Or a Republican who's actually fiscally conservative. That would be cool if you could find one. And if you do, let's take him to lunch. But you don't find too many of those.
Yeah.
Both parties are hell-bent on little more than keeping the other party out of power.
Yep. Well, I think a big chunk of that is that the other party has gotten substantially worse on the issue that the other party's supposed to be good on. So by comparison, they still seem okay. You know, when you have the majority of the Democrats out here being, you know, out in the open socialists, anybody saying anything about free markets or capitalism or anything like that seems like the good guy. And by the same token, when you have people like Trump saying that, you know, everyone that's coming from Mexico is a murderer and a rapist, you know, every Democrat looks like the humanitarian, you know, non-racist, you know,
humanitarian
person.
Of the year, just by saying they don't all suck.
Right. It doesn't take much to be less racist than your average Republican.
No, that's exactly right. Or the Republican can be pretty bad and still look good on let's pick Social Security. Democrats say, you know, they want to protect all of your benefits and they don't really care how much it's going to cost. Republicans will say, we're not going to touch your Social Security. There is nobody fiscally conservative saying the truth, which is Social Security is evil, and we need to give young people like David Fite an opt-out, right? And eventually David's children should not even be given an option. I mean, your kids, that should be the goal, David.
Yeah.
When your kids enter the workforce, and I hope they do someday so they can take care of you. When they enter the workforce, we can't have a world in which they are even offered as an option to enter a government-run Social Security plan, a defined benefit retirement program run by the government. It is an evil, evil thing when you force someone into a retirement program and then give them crappy results.
Right.
And it doesn't even contribute to the development of savings in our country because it's a Ponzi scheme. And no Republican's going to tell you that. To your point, all a Republican has to do is say, I'm not going to make Social Security more than what it is today. And they look, by comparison to Democrats, they look conservative.
Yeah, you can have Trump passing the bump stock ban, and while it's not an AR-15 ban, so it's not going door to door to take your AR-15s like some.
He looks
like
pro 2A by comparison.
Yeah, he's one of the worst 2A presidents we've ever had, and like outspokenly so. And every 2A group in the country backed him. Well, not every. I'll say there are like the good
not
ones.
Every, but to your point, I think everyone wanted to support him because they feared the opposite so badly.
Yeah.
No, it's insane. They're not hiding the ball. This isn't like he signed it in the middle of the night, right?
Right.
He says it just out loud, and everyone's like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Take the guns first, due process second. That's one of my favorite quotes of his. And, I'll tell that to, especially up here where I live.
He's a walking red flag law.
Literally. And, up here, I live in Trump country. Even though it's New York, it's still Trump country. I'm sure you're
Anything
familiar.
Anything out of New York City is Trump country in New York State. I spent a lot of years upstate New York as well. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so, like, I'm surrounded by, like, gun clubs and stuff like that. And I'm talking to people. I'm like, do you know what he actually thinks about guns? Because I talk to single issue voters. That's like the only thing I care about is 2A rights. So I'm voting for Trump.
It breaks your heart, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's such an opportunity for libertarians. You mentioned Gary in 2016. And I want to be polite here because I actually like Gary. I think he's... for the most part, he's a libertarian. I think for the most part, he means well. And I think that we should be grateful that he wanted to make a contribution toward our cause. However, having said all those polite things, I don't think he did us a great deal of service by running the type of campaigns that he did. When you're out there saying, I'm fiscally conservative like a Republican and socially liberal like a Democrat, you don't have much of a campaign from a messaging standpoint. You haven't really given people any reason to rally around you. Contrast that with Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not even true. It's a lie. Libertarians are not fiscally conservative like a Republican. Republicans aren't fiscally conservative.
Right.
And we're not socially liberal like Democrats. They're not socially liberal. They run around canceling each other. They're just leftists. That doesn't make them liberal. It's not the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that line worked on some people, probably including myself, because I was in 2016. I watched both primaries because I was raised in a independent conservative household, so we weren't Republicans, but my parents voted Republican pretty much every year.
Sure.
But going into that election, I looked at both sides because I was like, I'm not a Republican, and what I'm seeing from the Republican Party, I don't like. And then I didn't see anything better out of the Democrats, except for, Lincoln Chafee was, I think, their best candidate in 2016, and I actually remember liking him.
I hadn't thought about for a few months.
I actually remember liking him because he stood up. He made a really, really solid anti-war point in the very first Democratic debate.
He meant well.
Yeah,
he meant well. He didn't have the stomach for this sort of thing, but I think he meant well.
Yeah, I agree. And so I think we are the best of both worlds sales pitch worked on me to a point, and I think it worked on a number of people. But I think
you weren't ready. Remember, you were awfully young, David. Don't beat yourself up. You weren't ready for an edgier message.
Oh no. If I had listened to, if my introduction to libertarianism had been somebody like myself now, or like a John McAfee or somebody like that,
you would end up punching me in the face. If a 19-year-old David had seen a Mike ter Maat say Social Security is evil, you would have looked at your family and your grandparents and you would have punched me in the face. And I get that, but it's a tricky thing coming to terms with these over time.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Gary's campaign imploded, you might remember, you were awful young, you might remember that he forgot the name of a town in Syria when it was posed to him. And his campaign imploded soon thereafter. The media all piled in. Of course, they didn't like him in the first place.
Right.
So a lot of people were biased against him. But he had reached double digits in some of the polls. And he wound up with, you know, his 3%. And we're glad he got the 3%.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't much compared to where he had been. Contrast that with Donald Trump, who said, I could probably shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters.
Mm-hmm.
As big a jerk as Donald Trump is, and we should not mince words about that, right?
Right.
I'm not sure he's wrong about that. You know, the people who support Trump know dang well why.
Yep.
And the people who, you know, hate him know dang well why. And whether he shoots someone on Fifth Avenue or not is possibly not going to rock as many boats as it probably ought to.
Yeah, I think
Whereas,
he was 100% correct with that quote.
Yeah, whereas Gary forgets the name of a town in Syria. And I'm going to go on a limb and say shooting someone on Fifth Avenue is worse than forgetting what Aleppo is.
I don't know. If you ask CNN or Fox News, they might disagree with you.
Yeah, they might. They might. Hey, if CNN disagrees with you, you put that in your resume.
One of the things that pissed me off the most about that little soundbite is that I was already a fan and a registered libertarian at the time.
Good for you.
When I found out about him and then registered to vote and registered as a libertarian, like originally. But so I was already following the campaign when the whole "What is Aleppo" thing happened, and I watched the whole interview, and he answers the question. He goes, "Oh, right, that," and then knocks the question out of the park.
Yeah, but they don't share that part.
Nope. Oh my god, that had me fuming. From there, like, I should have realized there that it was like a losing battle and that most of what I was going to do for the next couple of years wasn't going to work. But I still had faith that this whole like libertarian thing was going to do a lot faster than it did.
I think it will do a lot more. I don't know about the speed, but I do think it'll, you know, we have real opportunities to the point that we're discussing. I think that we need to work harder at branding ourselves in a less apologetic fashion. We can't be out there seeking common ground with the duopoly politicians. We need to be seeking ground with Republican and Democratic voters, not with their politicians. And that was the mistake I believe that Gary made. So I believe that with a real powerful set of principles that, you know, we as libertarians, it comes almost as second nature. If we lead with those hard in a way that cleaves a hard edge against Democrats and a hard edge against Republicans, I think that we'll brand ourselves in a meaningful, memorable, distinguished fashion, and that will serve us much, much, much better. You won't you won't reach every American with that, not successfully. You're not going to get every American in the world to vote for you automatically just because you run a principled campaign. You're bound to piss off some people. But the object of the game is to get as many people to understand what your philosophy is, give them an opportunity to believe in you, give them something to grab onto, for goodness sake. And remember that we're only shooting for 37%.
Right.
37% of the popular vote wins the White House. And that's something that we should not lose track of. We're not shooting for 50%. We're shooting for 37, and we're hoping that 15% gets you into the debates.
Yeah.
If there are debates.
They might cancel them this year. I was having a conversation. This is super off topic, but I was just having a conversation the other day on Clubhouse about this. I think that 2024 is going to provide a very unique opportunity where there is going to be multiple fairly well-known third-party candidates. They don't exist quite yet, but we know that the Forward Party is probably going to run somebody. We know that like No Labels is going to try to run somebody. Unity might, like 2024 might be a thing. there's going to be a lot of these groups, and there's a lot of very famous, very popular people that are supporting some of these groups. And I think what we might end up with is Donald Trump and Joe Biden aren't debating at all, but what we do have is 7 or 8 well-viewed debates amongst the third-party candidates.
I think you're 100% right. As a matter of fact, I can damn near guarantee that we're going to have some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Those other groups don't have ballot access the way the Libertarian Party does.
Mm-hmm.
And that matters a lot.
No Labels is getting there. They're
working at it.
They've already got a couple states down, which is impressive.
It's very impressive. They're working at it. It's a very, as you know, expensive process. So we'll see how well that goes for them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of money to be made before they sleep on that project.
Oh yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. It matters our position in this, having ballot access, not only because we can get votes, right? Not only because of the way it looks the day after the election, however impressive that may be, and of course we need to focus on winning states, not just winning votes at some point. But ballot access also matters in the sense that the media likes a good story. And a piece of a good story is being relevant. And we have an opportunity to be relevant. But to be relevant, you have to have ballot access, because there are a lot of Americans who still view the process as being a competition among individuals because they're interested in seeing who's going to win the White House.
Yeah.
So they have to be able to look at any particular candidate and say, I could imagine, maybe some weird things have to happen, but I could imagine that person winning the race, running the White House. And that means not only you have to have a credible candidate, you have to have messaging that people can understand and hang on to, and that distinguishes that candidate from the others, but it also means you have to have ballot access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even if you're running a libertarian campaign and even if you're doing the thing that I think you shouldn't usually do, and you're being honest that like there's no chance in hell that I win this race, we're just trying to promote a message, we're just trying to hit 5% and get federal funds, like whatever your other goal is, even if you're blatantly honest about that goal, you still have to be electable. Like
agreed. And I think that being blatantly honest about that goal would undermine that. Indeed, I'll go you one step further. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that we need to set the bar that low. I don't think we're shooting for 5%. I think we're shooting for 15 before the debates. Assuming that there's a debate. One of the goals is we have to get some people to sponsor debates and to set the bar at a reasonable place, like the old-fashioned 15% in a certain number of polls, so that we can get in.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be the immediate goal. And after that, as Gary Johnson used to say, anything can happen. But that's got to be the goal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the debates are, we've seen, especially in the primaries, you see most clearly that once you're out of the debates, you're out of the race. And I worked for Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, and we got kicked out of the debates early on, and then they kept moving the threshold to keep us out of the debate.
Or backbenched, right? They can move you to day 2 or something.
Yeah. And so we were fighting that most of the time I worked for her, and,
that's a tough spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's important to be in those debates.
Yeah.
There will be other avenues. That's one of the great opportunities of, the modern era, is there's other avenues. There's, lots of different social media applications that did not exist before. You can get your message out. There are podcasts that, as we all know, dwarf CNN, for example. Pick one losing example. So there is no one particular debate or any one element of the media that is the be all and end all. That's good news that plays into our hands, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, we need to be on stage and to be seen as credibly on stage with members of the duopoly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think back to the Gary Johnson thing. One of the things that I used the most to get votes for him towards the end of his campaign was the Johnson-Stein debate that they did on PBS. They were so respectable, so clean, so professional, well-spoken, articulate. They talked about what they disagreed on, what they agreed on. They hit most of the points that needed hit. The sound bites and stuff from that debate were, I think, one of the best things the Johnson campaign had in their arsenal.
I agree with you 100%. And Jill Stein is a good person. I think that her politics, some of her politics make the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Stein for the first time a few weeks ago at the Rage Against War Machine rally in Washington at the memorial. And it was a real joy, even though I have no interest in the bulk of her politics, but to be reminded that there are single issues out there, and probably more than single issues, on which we can form coalitions with people like her party to get our message out and get things done. And that day in that rally was an example of that. So I was real proud of the people that put that rally together, and I was really happy to play a teeny tiny role as a sponsor.
Yeah, that was, I loved watching the success of that. I'm sad I wasn't able to make it. Part of me was glad. I knew I wasn't able to make it from a very early on standpoint. So when all the drama happened, I hadn't said anything publicly about it. I already wasn't planning on going. I didn't have to say pro or against or anything. I just backed off of Twitter for 3 days.
But it ended up working okay in the end, you know. People did the right thing. People worked at it. I thought that our party's chairman, Angela, actually did a great job of negotiating her way through that without ever, really knowing what was around the next corner.
Yeah.
So I was real proud of the team that worked that through. And I had the opportunity recently to meet Nick Brana of the People's Party. A really impressive young man who, again, I suspect that there are certain policies there that would curl your hair. But he's a good guy who means well. And look, he's anti-war. And in a year like 2023, when America is at war, which makes it a lot like almost any other year in our history, that is an ally that matters, right? That is an ally that really matters in a way that can create an impact on an important issue.
Yeah. I think we get bogged down by the differences way too much, which is why I've taken a step back almost entirely from the party, because in my opinion, it's very difficult to form these kinds of coalitions between parties, because the parties have to have the opinions on all the things. We have the wide platform. We have the disagreements in writing that we don't agree on specific issues. Where if you're working within, say, an anarchist or libertarian based anti-war organization, you can team up with whoever, because you don't have to have in your bylaws and in your statement of principles and stuff a whole bunch of stuff that people are gonna
disagree about.
With. So I've been putting a lot more of my focus into just single issue organizations like, Gun Policy Coalition or different organizations like that, where if I'm just promoting that, I can talk to anyone across the board that is even slightly pro 2A, and we don't have to talk about taxes. We don't have to talk about that one age of consent.
You don't have to punch
each
other in the face over tax policy.
Right. But
no, good for you, and you should. And those things can be very, very successful. Indeed, it's my observation that when those coalitions are formed that include what are normally considered ostensible competitors, possibly even sometimes enemies in the same coalition, that speaks volumes to policymakers, to politicians, and to the media and others who are watching. It really demonstrates your commitment. So I commend you on that. As you know, I am committed to, per se, helping the Libertarian Party at the moment. So you and I may be going in slightly different directions, but only in an operational sense, not in a philosophical sense. I still believe that single issue coalitions are an important tool in the future.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe the right presidential campaign in 2024 can make me change my mind, you know?
I think so. I think that you're going to be excited about, to be honest, I think you're going to be excited about our campaign. The platform we have is a bunch of really transformational issues designed to reimagine the relationship between us and our government. And in that sense, because it's a real foundationally principled platform, it forms the basis for agreement on so many libertarian issues that I think folks like David Fite are going to be excited about it.
So you brought it up earlier, so I have to ask. You were talking about the how politics in general, no matter what system, country, wherever you are, it attracts a certain type of person who likes to make decisions for other people.
Yeah.
What attracts you to want to run for president if it's not making
I
decisions
hate
for
those
other people?
I hate those people. I want to throw them out of a helicopter. That's probably not something I should say. Can I edit that? Can I walk that back just a moment? Metaphorically speaking, I would love to throw them out of a helicopter. No, look, we need to recognize that that's the case. And because of that, we have real institutional level problems with our government in the United States. It is not just a matter of individuals. It's not just a matter of parties. It's not just a matter of a group of people, you know, the 50 people running the White House today, they're the problem. No, it is the way these institutions are set up that is the problem. And I believe two things are true. One is a presidential campaign can be a real important vehicle for getting that message out. People will pay attention to a presidential candidate in a way that they would not normally open themselves up to certain ideas. We need to take advantage of that. The other thing that I believe is true, and there is a real dangerous idea floating on the Libertarian Party that this is not true, so I'm going to say it twice if I have to. I believe it is absolutely true the Libertarian Party can play an important role in the American political landscape. And right away. And that's because, like I say, we're not shooting for 50%, we're shooting for 38. And along the way, we're shooting for 15. And with all due respect to Gary Johnson, if he can get to double digits, so can we. So you get there and you get a couple of points beyond where Gary was just by not having such silly messaging. And all of a sudden you're on stage with a couple of dingleberries against whom you look pretty good as a principled matter in a live debate. That's a big opportunity. Don't tell me we can't play a role in American politics, because we can. And the object of the game is to let people know that we have institutional problems. The solution, for example, is not, we need to elect someone who really hates inflation. No, we need to end the Fed.
Right.
And I say that as an economist, not as just, someone who fell off the back of the pumpkin truck last week and decided to hate some random institution. I spent a lot of time with the Federal Reserve. I never worked for them as an employee, but I've met with the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in the boardroom itself. I've had my research on the banking industry cited publicly by the Fed chairman at the time. Spent years working on regulatory issues with Fed economists, a really smart group of people, well motivated. They want to do the right thing, right? But they do want to make decisions for other people.
Yeah,
they just do. And well-meaning, smart people aside, notwithstanding that all that can be true, they cannot live up to the mandate that we have given them. It's just not possible for a central bank to control inflation up and then down and then down and then up in a way that can lean against inflation, lean against expansion, avoid a depression. We're just not there technologically, and I tend to doubt that we ever could be. The system is biased toward an inflation rate above 2%. Now, Janet Yellen is trying to bury the fact that they're calling for a above 2% annual inflation rate in the distant future, even after we get a hold of inflation. That can't be that can't be the target. That's like the booby prize. That's admitting that you have failed. That can't be the target. So these institutions, the Fed is a good example. It's got to go. We've got to replace discretionary monetary policy with a rules-based system, like Milton Friedman said 50 years ago, and that'll save our pricing mechanism, and as research shows, help us avoid recession at the same time.
Yeah, it's really sad when you actually do, meet and work with and interact with these people on a regular basis. My dad, because of his job, spends quite a few hours a week in a meeting with Department of Health officials in New York. And, actually like friends with these kind of people. And I've done the same through the finance career and stuff.
I'm sure they're well-meaning civil servants.
Yeah, they all want to do the right thing. They're trying to help people. They're just in a system that is fundamentally incapable of doing that. And something I say on the show quite often is that I don't think that most of the philosophical libertarians in the country are part of the party. And I think most of the people in the party are not actually philosophical libertarians, because they don't get what we're talking about here, which is the fact most libertarians, not all, but just like a solid majority, are still in this and in politics because they want to make decisions for other people. They just want to make the decision
better.
And the decision that you should have more decisions, but they're still trying to get to that power. They're still trying to tell people what to do, because if we're being honest, if you look around and you see a town full of people that want to be controlled by government, the correct libertarian response to that is to say okay and move to a different town. It's not to tell them, no, you can't be controlled by government. I have to tell you how to live your life. You have to live free. That's not really
libertarian. Either, is it?
No, and
you might do them a favor and try to wake them up.
Right. You can talk to them as humans, but if you're running for like mayor of your town on the basis of like, I'm going to make you people live freer, you're not a real libertarian.
Thing. I agree with you. That would be a weird thing. But I do believe that most Americans want more freedom. I think a lot of people, well, first of all, a lot of people are waking up to the notion that they can live freer, that the government is not typically on their side when it comes to, standing by and protecting your civil liberties.
Yeah.
To the extent to which we all believe that was true 40 and 50 years ago, certainly we have cause to no longer believe that today, at least in most cases, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there are exceptions that just don't come to mind right now, but the federal government certainly is no longer in the business of protecting your liberties.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to break into American politics at the national level.
Yeah.
To help people come to terms with the truth that they feel in their chest. They just need people to articulate for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are similar in mindset to me, kind of what I articulated about why I'm not as involved in the party anymore. There's a lot of people that would agree with a lot of what I said there and take that too far and say that the LP is a waste of time for everybody and, a mistake and a joke and should be like yeeted from existence. I
I'm still a big believer in the Libertarian Party.
I am too. I just don't think that it's what I want to do right now. And I encourage, my friends that are still heavily involved, and I have a bunch of friends that are still, state chairs across the country. And,
sure.
I love the work
doing
that they're
the Lord's
doing.
work.
Yeah, especially being in New York, I don't think that the political system really gives us as much of a leeway as some of the other states that are doing some amazing work, like say Pennsylvania or Arizona or Michigan. But
there are places where it's easier to take advantage of an opportunity than New York State.
Yeah,
point.
We have huge, even like our state assembly and state senate districts are quite gigantic. And they're very well entrenched. They're very wealthy, kind of elitist people that hold almost every seat. It's a hard game to break into up here.
It is, and there's still, to your point, there's even still political families that control certain elements, especially of the Democratic Party. Makes it seem more like 1923 than 2023.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer in the effects that Larry Sharpe has had. For example, he was able to effectively get his message out. I think he was able to demonstrate what a potentially successful campaign would look like.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is more opportunity to be had there.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic that, first of all, Larry himself, and that others following in his footsteps will learn new ways of capitalizing on that opportunity. To your point, it's a gargantuan undertaking.
Yeah.
So we should be under no illusions of how easy that's going to be.
Yeah, but my point was going to be more to that there is a substantial chunk of the American population that will not listen to politics from anyone other than a politician.
Yeah.
There are people that just will not listen to me, that will listen to you just because you are running for office. You are a politician. You are part of that system.
I do not necessarily believe that is a good thing, by the way.
I don't either, but it exists.
But it does exist, and it does not help us to pretend that it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Other things exist. One of the things is a crazy psychological example. I didn't become a police officer until I was 49 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the greatest assets to a police officer is having gray hair. Not metaphorically. Metaphorically, that helps too, right? Just being of a certain age and having been around the block a few times. Mm-hmm. That's a big asset. No, I mean literally having gray hair calms people down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad. It's just an observation that my work friends were able to observe first. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's weird. Like dad shows up and all of a sudden people calm down. Like, I don't know. Let's use that, right? Yeah. If that works, let's use that. And I think that there's an element of that in politics. People, first of all, there are some people who appreciate gray hair literally. There are some people who react negatively to it too, and I get that. But there are people who will say, well, he had a lot of experience in Washington, worked for the government. He knows how it works, knows, how skeletons get buried. When he talks about criminal justice reform, he knows what he's talking about because he was a cop for 11 years, all of which may be true, but the deference given to that is probably too much. Having said that,
I think we lost him.